By 2050, the solution to climate change will require a complete transformation of society, with radical shifts in lifestyles and consumption patterns. It's a warning we hear often, without really knowing what it might mean to our daily lives. Björn Stigson is president of the World Business Council on Sustainable Development. He's in Australia this week to deliver a keynote address to some of our largest corporations, business leaders, bureaucrats and academics. And he's in our breakfast studio this morning. Björn, welcome to breakfast.
Thank you very much.
What's the thrust of the message to business leaders when you're here talking about climate policy? What's your key message?
Well, the key message is that there is actually a green race going on internationally, that the climate issue is not primarily a question of international negotiations, but it's really a question of competitiveness going forward. You know, in only a few decades, as you say, by 2050, we will have 1/3 more people in the world, and they will primarily be born, the new ones, in the developing countries. The developing countries will focus on improving quality of life, and at the same time will move into cities. We'll double the number of people in cities in 40 years' time. And all of this will mean an enormous pressure on resources and on pollution. So we will be looking at a world which is resource constrained, which is pollution constrained, and in that world, the ones that can deliver green solutions, clean solutions, will be the ones that will be winners in the economy.
I think it's fair to say we're already living in a world that's resource and energy constrained. This green race you're talking about, is that amongst businesses and amongst countries to try and develop these replacement energy sources, non-carbon intensive energy sources? Is that what you're talking about?
This is a race both between countries and companies. And the ones
Who's leading the race, the countries or the companies?
Well, they are complementary because countries are made up of companies, or the actors in the economy are companies. But the countries that are really trying to pull ahead in this race are China and the United States, very clearly. And the Chinese policy from the government is very, very clear. They want to be the world's leader on green, clean technologies going forward.
It's interesting you name China and the US because at Copenhagen in December it was China and the US who couldn't really come to the agreement that would have allowed a global agreement, really. I mean, that's praising it, but I think we can largely put it that way. 3 years ago, you predicted that things will get worse before they get better because governments feel they do not have the political mandate to act on climate change. Do you still think governments think they don't have the political mandate? Is that why we didn't see agreement at Copenhagen or something else?
Yes, I think that Copenhagen was trying to put a cap on emissions, and leading countries like China and the United States, among others, do not want to agree to that kind of cap. That's why you are going to see a different kind of architecture in the climate agreement going forward. Much more bottom-up actions, as we saw in the pledges from Copenhagen. And that these issues will be driven by business considerations, as I called it, the green race. This is about being the leader on the solutions going forward. This is about opportunities. This is not about taking on commitments in a global agreement.
So it's survival and economic progress that's driving this, not necessarily a more a generous kind of attitude to the survival of the planet. But are you saying we shouldn't be worrying about targets anymore? We shouldn't be worrying about a global agreement on targets. We should just get each country to build in and perhaps write down its direct action pledges?
I find it extremely difficult to see, based on my experience over many years in the climate negotiations and what I see at the moment, that we will over the next years come to an international agreement that will put any caps on emissions by countries. That doesn't mean that we should not act, because we believe, and I believe, that climate change is a real threat going forward. But I also believe that if we can get this to be seen as an opportunity for green solutions and being a leader on these solutions going forward, we will have a much more dynamic and progressive set of actions than going on for year after year trying to negotiate something which we have not been able to up to now.
And I will come to those solutions in just a second, but at the moment in this country we've had an election, and one of the political arguments is about attitudes and approaches on climate change, particularly the idea of a price on carbon. I think last year you predicted that the world will see a price on carbon and that the big corporations are already factoring that into their long-term planning.
That's true.
Is it inevitable, and within how long?
That's true. And but when you look at the price of carbon, that comes in different forms and shapes. It can be an emissions trading, it can be a carbon tax, it can be a fuel efficiency standard, it can be a building code, it can come in many ways. But we cannot manage carbon emissions going forward if we don't have a price on it. It's very difficult to manage anything if it's not properly priced. And I believe there has to be a price of carbon.
What are the Australian-based members of your group telling you? Companies like BHP Billiton, Commonwealth Bank, Lendlease, Woodside Petroleum, are they arguing for a price of carbon? Are they saying they want the Australian government to do that?
They have historically said that they want certainty, a high degree of certainty in the policy framework, so they know what they are investing against. But actually, I'm leaving the studio and I'm going to a meeting with my members to further
Give us a call, will you, Björn, to let us know what they say. And a lot of people would like to know. More broadly, this notion of the green race and a revolution that's required to be able to bank on the survival of the planet, I suppose, and to make the energy changes we need. You talk about impacts on lifestyle and consumption patterns. There has to be a lot of work to stimulate consumers and customers to live differently and buy differently. What do you mean? Give us a picture of the way we might be living differently, can you?
Well, this will look different in different parts of the world. But the challenge that we have is that we're going to be 9 billion people in 4 decades' time by 2050. And if 9 billion people are going to live well within the limits of the planet, then the footprint that we have per person today in the rich world needs to come down. That doesn't mean necessarily hardship. It means that we need to have smarter technologies. About half of the energy use in this world goes into buildings. It's energy use in buildings. We don't need to have buildings which are less attractive. We need buildings that are different. We have already the technology that we can cut energy use from buildings in half.
But is it as simple as that, just changing how many lights we turn off or how we save energy within buildings? What about changes to the way we live our lives? Are they inevitable?
It means, well, you have to look at the big ticket items. And as I say, half of the world's energy use is in buildings. That means having different technology solutions for buildings. It also means looking at the urban infrastructure. Another very big ticket item is land transport, where we also have very, very strong potentials for energy savings with different type of transport systems. So we should be looking at the services that we need and not exactly how much resources we consume for those services. We can have a very good life with a much, much smaller footprint in resource use and pollution than what we have today.
It's often said there's no gain without pain, though, and I know in the past you've said we haven't seen these sort of changes happen peacefully before. It's usually taken a revolution. Do you think we can have peaceful change? Or
I think there will be a lot of tension in this change going forward. But what is a key message is we have now had a project for 2 years called Vision 2050, where we have been able to see what could a sustainable world look like. But the amount of transformations, the amount of innovations that are needed to achieve that are going to be very substantial. And there's going to be winners and losers in this process. But I don't see the alternative. If we don't do this, we will not have a sustainable planet in the future.
Okay, business is all about winners and losers, I guess, and you're talking here about the way forward to a carbon-constrained future. Yet some of your member companies like Shell and BP, were part of a so-called carbon club. I mean, how much do we need to blame the big global fossil fuel and energy corporations for governments feeling that they don't have the mandate to act decisively?
Well, Shell and BP have been members for 15 years in the World Business Council, and they left what you call the Carbon Club, the Global Climate Coalition, already in the 90s. So that's history, so to say. What they are asking for today are the same things as we are promoting as the World Business Council, and they are prominent members of the council.
Björn Stigson, thank you very much for joining us on Breakfast.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Björn Stigson is President of the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, and he's in Australia this week speaking to business leaders, members of large corporations, bureaucrats and academics. It's 8:16 on RM Breakfast.
G'day, Paul Barclay here. Tonight on Big Ideas, I'm in conversation with Ian Lowe.
Politicians use